This is a story about Andrei Chikatilo and how one man's hidden darkness became the Soviet Union's worst nightmare. Over 12 years, he murdered at least 52 people, primarily children and young women, while an entire system failed to stop him. His crimes were so horrific that even hardened detectives struggled to comprehend the brutality. This is the complete story of the Butcher of Rostov. Andrei Romanovich Chikatilo was born in Ukraine during one of the Soviet Union's darkest periods. His childhood was marked by poverty, war, and whispered family trauma. He grew up with stories of his older brother allegedly being kidnapped and cannibalized during the Ukrainian famine, though the truth of this remains uncertain. What is certain is that Chikatilo developed into an awkward, troubled young man plagued by inadequacy and disturbing urges he couldn't control or understand. By his 20s, Chikatilo discovered he was impotent, unable to perform sexually in conventional ways. This humiliation festered inside him, twisting into something far darker. He married, had children, and became a teacher, presenting the world with a mask of Soviet normalcy. But beneath that unremarkable exterior, violent fantasies consumed him. He began exposing himself to students, behavior that eventually cost him his teaching position. He moved from school to school, town to town, each dismissal covering up the real reason he left. The system protected itself rather than the vulnerable children in his path. In December of 1978, Chikatilo crossed the line from fantasy to reality. He lured 9-year-old Lena Zakotnova to an abandoned shack in Shakhty. What happened in that shack revealed the truth about Andrei Chikatilo. He could only achieve sexual satisfaction through violence, through blood, through the act of killing itself. He strangled Lena, stabbed her repeatedly, and mutilated her body. When he emerged from that shack, he had discovered his terrible purpose. But here's what nobody knew. The Soviet police arrested the wrong man almost immediately. Alexander Kravchenko, a known sex offender living near the crime scene, became the convenient suspect. Despite weak evidence and a coerced confession, Kravchenko was convicted and executed for Lena's murder. Chikatilo walked free, protected by the system's desperate need to close the case. That single failure would cost dozens more lives. Chikatilo realized he had nearly gotten away with murder, and the experience taught him valuable lessons. He needed to be more careful, more strategic. He took a job as a supply clerk that required extensive travel throughout the Soviet Union. His work gave him the perfect cover: access to countless train stations, bus stops, and remote areas where vulnerable people waited alone. He began to hunt. His pattern became devastatingly effective. He targeted runaways, prostitutes, and homeless children, people Soviet society had already abandoned. He approached them at train stations and bus stops, appearing harmless, even friendly. The glasses, the shabby clothes, the unassuming demeanor all worked in his favor. Victims saw a middle-aged man who looked like somebody's father or teacher. They followed him into nearby forests and secluded areas, where the friendly stranger transformed into something monstrous. The murders themselves were ritualistic and unspeakably brutal. Chikatilo stabbed his victims dozens of times, mutilated their bodies, and removed organs and body parts. He bit off tongues, noses, and other flesh. The violence was frenzied, almost primal, as if he was trying to consume or merge with his victims. Each murder satisfied him temporarily, but the compulsion always returned, driving him to kill again and again. Between 1978 and 1990, the bodies kept appearing. Forests around Rostov-on-Don became dumping grounds for the mutilated remains of children and young women. The evidence was overwhelming, the pattern unmistakable. Multiple victims killed in similar ways, bodies found in comparable locations, all within a specific geographic area. This was clearly a serial killer, but Soviet authorities faced a political problem. Here's what nobody's talking about. Serial killers weren't supposed to exist in the Soviet Union. According to communist ideology, such depravity was a product of capitalist decadence, impossible in their perfect socialist society. Admitting a serial killer was operating meant admitting systemic failure. So cases were handled locally, information wasn't shared between jurisdictions, and the true scope remained hidden. Chikatilo continued killing while bureaucracy and ideology created a shield around him. The breakthrough came because of one determined investigator. Major Mikhail Fetisov assigned Viktor Burakov to lead a specialized team in 1983, after the body count became impossible to ignore. Burakov, a psychiatrist and investigator, spent 8 years of his life hunting this killer. He reviewed thousands of suspect interviews, analyzed crime scenes, and slowly built a profile. He knew he was looking for someone who could blend in, someone with freedom to travel, someone the victims would trust. Chikatilo was actually questioned multiple times during the investigation, but here's how he kept slipping through. He had a rare medical condition where his blood type differed from his semen type. When police tested suspects, they compared blood samples to semen found at crime scenes. Chikatilo's blood was type A, but his semen was type AB. This biological anomaly made him appear innocent, and investigators moved on to other suspects. That genetic quirk saved his life again and again. By 1990, Burakov's team had narrowed their focus to men who traveled extensively and had been present in areas where bodies were discovered. They began conducting surveillance at train stations and bus stops. On November 6, 1990, an undercover officer noticed a middle-aged man in a dark coat behaving strangely near a train station in Novocherkassk. The man was watching young people, approaching some, being rejected by others. His clothes had suspicious stains. They followed him, noted his name, ran his background. Andrei Chikatilo had been questioned before. But then something changed. Investigators discovered Chikatilo had been near multiple crime scenes at the times of various murders. His travel records matched the geographic pattern of the killings. His previous questioning had been cursory, dismissed because of that blood type discrepancy. Burakov ordered his arrest on November 20, 1990. When they brought Chikatilo in for interrogation, he initially denied everything. But Burakov knew how to break him. The investigator appealed to Chikatilo's ego, suggested that science might want to study him, implied he was historically significant, rather than simply monstrous. After days of interrogation, Chikatilo began to confess, and once he started, he couldn't stop. He confessed to 56 murders, more than investigators had even connected to him. He provided details only the killer could know, describing his victims, their deaths, what he did to their bodies. The confessions were so graphic that hardened investigators had to leave the room. The trial began in April 1992 and became a spectacle. Chikatilo was kept in a metal cage in the courtroom, a common practice in Soviet trials, but particularly fitting given his animal-like behavior. He alternated between coherence and apparent madness, sometimes ranting, sometimes howling, sometimes sitting silent and vacant. Victims' families screamed at him, calling him a monster, demanding his execution. He was found guilty of 52 murders and sentenced to death for each count. On February 14, 1994, Andrei Chikatilo was taken to a soundproofed room and executed with a single bullet to the back of his head. He was 58 years old. The families of his victims received no notice of his execution until it was already complete, denied even the closure of knowing the exact moment justice was delivered. But here's what this case forces us to confront. How many victims might have been saved if ideology hadn't prevented proper investigation? How many children died because the Soviet system refused to acknowledge that monsters could exist within their borders? Chikatilo himself was a product of Soviet society, shaped by its traumas, enabled by its failures. The question that haunts everyone who studies this case is simple and terrible. In a different system, one that acknowledged reality rather than propaganda, would Andrei Chikatilo have been stopped after his first victim instead of his 52nd?